Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Pixel Classroom podcast. For those of you that are on spring break like me, I hope you're enjoying your time off. For everybody else who's off doing other things, I hope you thank you for joining us for today. So I would like to, of course, say hello. I am, of course, Ryan Reed, the host of the Pixel Classroom podcast, and I welcome you to our big, believe it or not, episode 175 episodes. With our guest today, I was just talking to her about that being a big thing for me, because those who do know me for a number of years know that's probably the longest I've had a podcast last. So I figured out to celebrate the big episode, I would actually present, as the joke is, she's right now probably laughing off in the background studio here with our current guest. So she was a coach first year for new teachers. She originally graduated with her master's in elementary education from Eastern Oregon University. And then she later moved on to Pecos, New Mexico to teach kindergarten for about 3 years. And during that time, she did a lot of learning and leading for that area too. I'll let her explain a little bit more of her story. And she actually got in, and during that time, she created the Thriving Teacher Framework, a framework that helps new and first years teachers manage their workload and have a thriving career. And the stages from that, from classroom management all the way to organization and pieces and grading. And she'll talk about that here in the episode here. And I would also like her, as a fellow Teach Better Network member here too, I'd like to welcome the one and only Helena Hains to the Pixel Classroom podcast. And there she is. Hello, Helena.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you are quite welcome. And like I said, thank you for joining us today here for the big 175. So I give you a little bit of an intro. I didn't want to give your whole story away, but why don't you talk to our audience, both here in the live feed and into the audio, exactly who you are, what came up with the present teacher, and where it led you to today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. So my name's Helena. I'm the creator of The Present Teacher. I graduated with my master's in elementary education, like he said, in 2018, and I moved from Oregon to New Mexico for my first teaching position. I was barely 21 at the time when I graduated, and I started teaching, and I was quickly overwhelmed with the amount of work teachers were expected to do. Arguably, I felt like it was a little bit harder than my master's program. And I felt a little bit embarrassed because I felt like if I had gone through that, teaching should have been a little easier for me. And so when I started teaching, I was the first car there. I was the last one to leave. I was working my weekends away. And I just remember being absolutely frazzled emotionally and mentally. I would zone out after the workday. I felt decision fatigue. Like, if you ask me to do one more thing, I swear my mind's going to explode. And I remember having this moment thinking, there's no way that I can continue on. I'm not cut out for this. And that was really hard for me to handle because I wanted to teach since I was 5 years old, and I forced my little brother Dalton to play school with me. So I'm sure like most of us do. So over winter break, I remember sleeping like the first 3 days straight because I was just exhausted. And I remember looking around and crying and thinking, I have a decision to make. I'm either sticking with this and giving it my all for finishing out the year and maybe a year after that, or I need to give up. And I decided to continue going. And throughout that time, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression during my first year of teaching, which kind of explained a lot. So I was navigating the mental health space, and then COVID happened. I finished off that year. I started listening to podcasts, taking courses, learning about time management, and then COVID happened. And I started to notice that other new teachers online were experiencing the same challenges I faced during my first couple of years of teaching. So I created The Present Teacher. And the whole mission behind The Present Teacher is to have the hard conversations about mental health and saving time and having that work-life balance, but also to put teachers in a place mentally and energetically where they can be in the moment to make an impact with their students, because we have a million things going on in the background. It is really hard to show up in the moment with your students and to make that impact and connect with them. And my job as a first-year teacher coach and a new teacher coach is to help those new teachers manage their workload so they could be the teacher that they know they were meant to be when they started this journey.
First of all, it's absolutely amazing what you did in work. And I actually, can sound that off, despite the fact you actually finished your master's at 20 and I was a young lad of 31 when I finished my master's for a career change and everything. But yeah, I had to agree. When I first got into more of the classroom work and everything, I really was just surprised. Like, this isn't something I talked about. And even the classrooms I went, it wasn't like they were perfect. And I would see some students or from elementary to high school really just like behavior, and like the teacher could just do it and like snap their fingers and magically just kind of get the room together. And then I struggled with that. I didn't understand myself either. And like you, I know I've dealt with depression for a number of years since my teen years, in fact, as well as other issues. But I like the fact that you kind of got into that, figuring that strange little piece there yourself about helping more first year. And I have to say, for somebody who did a career change at a much older age, I mean, not by much, by a decade at the worst, but at the same time it's like, I really wish I would have had an instructional coach there. I had a wonderful mentor who herself just recently retired, but I felt more like she was trying to work, since I was instructional tech and more tech integration and learning the one-to-one and more digital learning. It was easier to learn that versus actually running a classroom. And what has been that little model for you, Crane, Helena, to actually get that from classroom management to actually working out for that personalized coaching for first year teachers that is very badly needed right now?
Yeah, so for me, that's where the thriving teacher framework came into play. I started to realize that there were aspects in the teaching world that I just couldn't balance. And it was through sharing with my community online that I ran into batching, and I started going into time management. And so batching is doing like-minded tasks into one section instead of jumping around randomly. So when I first started teaching, I would have this to-do list that had 10, 20 unrelated items on it, and I would feel completely discouraged when I didn't complete that. But then I started to ask myself, what are the main things I have to get done on a weekly basis in order to keep my classroom running? Meaning, if I didn't touch them all month, my classroom would just completely fall apart. And that's where I created what I call classroom running activities. These are the activities I have to do on a weekly basis to keep my classroom running. And after reflecting on that, a lot of that was based off of the book Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. That's kind of
Yep,
what the jump
I've
start
read
was
that.
from.
Yep.
Mhm. And so I came up with the main things I need to get done are first managing my classroom first and foremost, because if my kids aren't, following expectations, they're not going to learn. Planning and prepping, data collection, communication, and then organization. Those are the things I need to make sure are down packed in order to keep my classroom running, and that those are the actual stages of the thriving teacher framework. So I started sharing these online, and I started to realize that a lot of teachers struggled with many of these aspects. So that's kind of where it all began.
And it's really interesting. I mean, you perfectly hit it that classroom manager is a key, and something I've had wonderful years, and I've had one years where it's like I feel like I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do, have done it in the right, or ask for advice, and it's just like it can't seem to keep the management going very well. And then I've been the ones where teachers who they say have a tight room classroom, and then they'll run into those exact same problems. What do you think is really the easiest, but is at the same time is the hardest thing with a classroom management, whether you're in elementary to, even high school level? What do you think is always seems to be the problem, and what are some of you think of some of the solutions to work with it? Because we all know that one size fit all will not fix anything with classroom management. Like I said, I had a couple years where there was barely anything. Then I had a year where it's like, what is this? And it's like I'm doing everything possible, and it's not making a dent. And admin's kind of like, well, we don't have any advice for you either. It's like, well, then what do we do?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I noticed a big problem with my classroom management when I first started teaching. Like you said, it seemed like the mentor teachers I was following, they just naturally had it down. But some years were harder than others. And I feel like I had to have a shift in mindset when I first started teaching on classroom management. I would scroll, social media, and I'd see these blurt beans, class parties, all of these cute classroom management trends that were working for other teachers, and I would try them and they wouldn't work for me. And that's because I needed to shift my mindset. It wasn't that these strategies weren't effective, it's that I was trying to use them as my whole classroom management strategy. And instead, I had to go back to the basics, which I wasn't taught in school. Despite having a master's degree, they didn't teach us classroom management. They threw you into student teaching, hoping you would learn it
Mhm.
there. And for me, I went back to what are procedures and expectations in the classroom. And I found that I was telling my students what I expected, but I wasn't modeling it to my students. So my kinders, very well, loving kids, would try their best, but then I'd get frustrated when they would goof off in line, even though I told them 1,000 times that we need to be at a zero in the hallway and not running crazy. So then I'm like, okay, we need to model what the expectations are. So I started modeling what does it look like, sound like for this expectation. And I would show them, I would physically get up and show them, and we'd have a discussion. What does this look like and sound like? And then I would show them the wrong way to do it. And we would discuss what it doesn't look like and sound like, and then why that's important. I feel like teachers often miss explaining to the students why it's important, because I realized later, 9 times out of 10, when you have a strong relationship with your students, they want to thrive. They want to make you happy, especially when you have a strong relationship with them. Sometimes they just don't know how, and there's a miscommunication with that. So, telling them why that's important will help them remember later why they should be conducting behavior and expectations that way. And like you said, there's years where I need to lean more into my expectations and procedures. I need to review them throughout the year. But there's other years where, let's say I have a couple students I'm having a really hard time reaching. I really need to lean into my relationship with them. I really need to lean into having those positive affirmations, that positive feedback to them, because oftentimes those students that I had the hardest time building a connection with, they weren't receiving a lot of positive affirmations or, anything like that at home or in their environment. So I had to be that voice that pointed the positive, for not only to remind me that they're trying their hardest, but for them to see it as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I've had former students who would like, be the hard problem, and then they would leave my class, and so forth, and go to a different teacher. And then they would say, like, I missed your class. I really missed your class. Like, well, why is that? Is it because I'm not holding you, like, because you're going to hold the higher expectations, or because you aren't able to, do what you want to do? And they kind of said, well, no, it just feels like I had a better relationship with you versus this other teacher, and the teacher knows what they're doing. It's just I feel like I better. I said, well, see, that's a good point. But at the same time, I was expecting things of you, and you did not want to pull that. And now you sadly are going the opposite direction. Now realizing, oops, I didn't know what I had until it was gone. And now it's like they can't pull that. It's very interesting. Like I said, home can do that. Sometimes it even can be peer influence. I mean, sad to say, there are classrooms where you have that one student, and they're like, well, if I'm going to do bad in this class, I don't want to be in here. You should join me that way, because if you're my friend, I should do that too. But then sometimes they're very conflicted, because like, well, yeah, but at the same time, I kind of want to learn this class, but why do I have to fail it because you just have no interest in it? And I think sometimes that does work. Good point, when they don't have the support here. And as much as we try that relationship, it can be an issue. I mean, one of my former teachers, her philosophy, long gone, was try to help teach them to be better people, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. And it should fall in place, but she didn't admit it was like as I said, the silver bullet that would magically fix everything either.
Mm-mm. No, and I feel like, I don't know if you've seen this too. Disruptive behavior has been on the rise, at least what I've heard from districts and teachers that I work with. And districts don't exactly know how to respond to these extreme disruptive behaviors. And I feel like a lot of schools aren't equipped with the support network for some of these students. So it falls back on the teacher. And that can be really hard to navigate, because sometimes you feel pulled whether or not you should be tailoring to this one student or doing the best for the whole class. Are you seeing something else or something similar in your
Oh
class?
yeah, it has, and it really does. And I've seen the same with admin. There's some admin that will come up with a plan, or at least work, or say, yeah, we know about this group, and we've all got to spearhead it together, instead of just like, I'm going to throw this on this person, or I'm going to throw it on that teacher, or you know what, they're not in athletics. Maybe if we can get them in a community program, that'll work. I'm like, well, yeah, but you're just throwing it to somebody else. There's no true word help. I mean, one thing I did with a district several years ago is I finally said, is like, why do we need to always put these specific students always together? Like, they're always together, and they don't need to be together. And it was like a light bulb went off in everybody's head. Like, wait, you're right. I mean, we can't perfectly move them all, but you're right. Why don't we take these people, put them here, put these people here? And they realized that really fixed a lot of the problems, but it was a group effort and everything else too. And it is, I mean, things, and the truth is, I've been looking, and people know me, when my doctor, I like to look at statistics. I like to read on, very good peer reviews, and why the last couple of years has been more accelerated from COVID and other reasons. It's been on the rise for almost 16 years. It just changed, and there's been leaps, and people are seeing now too, Justly or low. It's varying. Like some are like some it's still where it is, and some are like, well, now it's kind of dropping in lower levels. So some people are like, I think we're seeing that next wave kind of go in and out and everything. I remember one of my former districts, they talked about the class of 2011, and they just do not understand that class, and they were like, not a I mean, not the whole class. We're talking maybe 15, 20 out of a class of like 400. But they said themselves too, is like, it was just weird. But they said, but it wasn't like it happened overnight. It happened for a while. And as they got older, it just kept that trend. And then it just kind of went back to like, that was interesting. And now we're kind of back to what it is. And some of them, they said themselves, some of the worst ones had better relationships with certain X, Y, and Z. So they had to concentrate on the ones that had better relationships. And they said that seemed to crest that behavior. But I think it's various things. I don't always say it's on one thing. I think it's a lot of things. And, and other people too, on our podcasts and other people in our own network, Helen, know that too, is sometimes it can start at a very early age. It can happen in a very simple situation. It also can deal with life circumstances too. And I think the problem is when we don't have support to help us with us, and they think you're the one who's got to do it because, hey, I was able to always fix the problem. Like, well, did you always fix the problem, or did people help you with the problem? Well, I had other people help me with the problem. Like, well, then it wasn't all on you. So why are you thinking I'm the magic, shining star? It's going to make me invincible and just fix the problem out by it. As they say, we can't always be like the TVs and movies where, oh yeah, here's the teacher takes that class and just makes them absolutely work, versus like, yeah, it doesn't really work that way.
No, and it's a lot of pressure on the teachers as well.
Yeah, and like I said, that's the other one things we do too. And like I said, it always did, and it even goes back to admin, even community, all things. Like I said, it's not just one thing, but it can start that tidal wave on that, and that's where I think it's good. And I think that really goes into thing is for someone for you who got into coaching very, very soon, Helena. I got to ask you, what was that kind of transition to go from the student teacher, as you said, dealing with the kindergartens and the lower elementary level, to being more of like, got to work with these teachers, be that teacher's teacher to help them with those plans. Like, what did you work on that? I mean, I know you've been using with the batch, and you've definitely been working on some of the other classroom schedule, but what really got you into that frame of mind to start, seeing this and start helping those other teachers? Because many of them were pretty much brand new to it as you were.
Yeah. So during COVID, I noticed my district in particular, we didn't have one-to-one devices, and we didn't have any smart boards or anything. So when COVID happened, I was put on the forefront to help pretty much most of the people in my district, because it was a small district, on how to use these one-on-one devices. And I remember going onto social media and seeing all these teachers talk about how overwhelmed they were trying to balance teaching in the classroom and possibly in person at the same time. So that's when I started sharing teacher wellness tips and self-care. I know that was very common, especially in that era, about talking about teacher self-care. But then I realized that it was a little more woo than what I'm comfortable with, because I'm very linear. I'm point from A to B, and that's just how my mind works. And I remember reflecting on, what if I can just share practical tips? And then I remember feeling like I didn't exactly have a program in my district that helped new teachers. And what if we could work together to create a program, or to create a culture where the responsibility, or the need to support new teachers isn't put on new teachers or other teachers, is not put on admin. Instead, we started hiring out and getting other programs to come in and helping those new teachers. So that's where the present teacher, and where I kind of pivoted to helping new and first year teachers. And I sat in a video coffee chat with 5 first year teachers, and 2 of the 5 told me, we have programs in our districts for new teachers, the other 3 didn't. And out of those 5 teachers, only one of them that had the program of the 2 said that it was helpful. The rest of the time, they were covering aspects of teaching that they didn't necessarily need. So my thoughts are, what if we go out to the new teachers, ask them, what do they need help with? What can we help them with? What do they want to learn about? How can we support them? And we started tailoring programs and support for that, and asking what they need, instead of just, putting something together.
Yeah, and I mean, right here, and like I said, for those that are on the audio, I'm going through the website. But yeah, I mean, it's a little bit. One thing I've also learned too, is you can't just do it all at once. You can't just, like I said, just throw it all out there and and expected. I mean, you said earlier too about taking like what makes my classroom function. That's always my thing too. I was like, what is it that means to make my classroom function for these lessons? That way, if we have a snow day or we have something that goes off or it's test day or hey, we just had our one team go to state, we're going to be missing about half the school. What's going to keep the class moving? Because now it's like, well, what can I do? I can't do this big project. I have less of the things, or, we can't do this at home because of the one-to-one. But I mean, it's like going through area 2 is like working with doing it. Because I mean, you said it pretty simple right here where it feels like it's empowering and it's not overwhelming. I mean, I don't think we talked about COVID and we'll be talking this probably for several years. But I think that's the one thing a lot of people don't do is teachers always say, oh, look, one more thing on my plate. It's so overwhelming. But, it's the truth is what's empowering, what's doing those small little things to change it. And I think that's something you've really kind of looked at perfectly. I mean, like I said, social media is a big area too. And I remember using a lot of my social media from formerly Twitter to a lot of my Instagram. And now I'm more present on LinkedIn and Instagram, as well as some other pieces in Blue Sky, EDU Sky. But you've talked about how you circle. And believe it or not, until I joined here with the network, I really did not use Circle. And the truth is, Circle is a very wonderful platform for working too. And like, how did you get in it? Because one of your big things here on your website too is, of course, using Circle into that area. So like, how, first of all, I mean, explain what Circle is and how it's different from other social medias, or should I say different from Discord? Because sometimes people say, hey, Circle and Discord look like the same thing. I said, well, they're not, but they're similar. But how does Circle work, and how do you use it for your community for creating for this coaching?
Yeah, so Circle I ran into because one of the leading podcasters that I followed was using Circle for their community. And what I really liked about it is it wasn't Facebook, it wasn't on the typical platforms. And then also you can tailor it by discussion and by topic. So that way, when teachers had a question about one of the different phases, so let's say it's about classroom management, they could go into that discussion and ask for support, or they could pull up the resources for that, which I really, really liked. And I liked how the content and the questions that I was answering inside that community was tailored to depending on what that teacher needed. It was in that discussion. So it's just a really great way to bring the content around discussion and working together as opposed to other platforms. I know for some other platforms, I've used things like Teachable, and it's very much more like a college course. And I kind of wanted something that's more tailored toward communication and collaboration and working together and using each other for support. One thing that I often sign off my emails or my podcast is that we're stronger together. And that's really the backbone to why I use that.
Yeah, and I think you put that pretty good too with the platforms and everything. Because, like I said, since I've joined the Teach Better Circle, I've really been nice to actually talk about the Erskine community. I mean, that's how I was able to talk with you here for the podcast and a few other things. But I did like that. Then we could click on that platform and we could actually do that discussion, actually work with it. Like I said, I did do an example of Discord. Like I belong to 3 Discord. Granted, one is actually STEM work and perler beads, as many people know me as the Pixel teacher, because of a lot of the stuff I do with pixels and perlers, but also because that community works pretty well on that platform. We can get the smaller areas, but we're able to share and communicate there. But meanwhile, Circle can really give us to that like pieces. You can get on that. You can have that discussion. You also can do that safe area too. I know as a member of the Edu Protocols Plus panel, we do the exact same thing on Circle. And I feel like I have such a better connection there and learning it and seeing it in action versus, oh, I read this in the book, or here's what they did. And then I go do it. And like, why is it completely exploded in my face? And why am I not doing it right? Because I'm doing exactly everything this teacher has shown me how to do it. And I do like how you've got this set up here. What you have in the video live feed here is about showing you, like, you break it down nicely by a month, what you're doing, and I really like you go through all those main things of the classroom, from dealing with classroom management, how to do relationships, how to do it with community and parents, but also going to, here's how grading works. Here's how we collect that classroom data and do the assessment. Like me, I've always been told by every single principal, boy, Ryan just knows every form of assessment, how to utilize it, how to compare it to notes. He's really good at that. And then he's gotten it so good to where it's like, if something explodes in his face, he can just snap his fingers and come up with a new lesson plan and still not deviate from what he needs to get the students. A lot don't know how to do that. And you've created that platform where it's like, if you don't know how to do it, here's what you can focus on. And then this is how it will segue or scaffold nicely into that next part. So even if you're an expert at, say, classroom management, but maybe you're not really good at parent teacher contact, or maybe you're really good about that, but say, well, yeah, I have a pile here and I have a digital folder here in Google. I think that lesson plan I was about to teach on housing and budget is here, but I'm not quite sure how it is, versus like, well, let's organize this a little bit better. So the process is not me doing it. It's more of like, oh, hey, this is coming up. I know where to go. This is where I can update it. And this is how it works on that time saving management, as you said.
Absolutely. And like you said, I love how when you put a piece of like content or you share your strategy for how you go about something, you can have a discussion below. And like you said, the people that are taking in the content can then share how they tweaked it and made it their own. And that's one great thing about teaching. And I feel like our strong point is when we first start teaching, we take strategies from other teachers and then we take our learning style, our teaching style, and we make it our own. And that's one of the amazing things I love about teachers and teaching in general is it's very much we're working together to make ourselves better, to make it our own. And it's very, quite honestly, a creative process, which I absolutely love.
I had a professor years ago say one thing that's great about us teachers, we like to steal and pillage things from each other, but at the same time is we more of like we learn from something, take it, and then make it our own. And they said that's what's one of the great things about teaching is nobody's going to be jumping out. You're like, hey, you stole my idea. More like, well, that's an interesting idea. Or like, oh, I never saw how this would work in an art room or in a math class. I was a straight English teacher. I was a straight industrial arts teacher, and you actually did that. It's like I'm a business tech and media teacher, and sometimes I will take things from a math classroom or an art classroom and somehow move it into my curriculum. People look at me like, well, how did you do that? I never even thought I could do something like that. Or you got a design space with your Cricut and you're kind of coming up with the 4 C's and like an art style grid. I didn't think that would ever cross platform. Everybody told me I'm on an island by myself and just be an expert at that island. And I was like, no, you don't have to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually having a conversation with another first year teacher coach last week, and we were talking about how we used aspects of creating an online community to make our teaching better. And we both started talking about batching, and it was really interesting how we both do things the same way but different. She likes to, chunk her time and do specific tasks where I have a schedule for my whole week that makes it easy for me to get everything done. So, hearing those ideas from other teachers and tweaking it and making it your own, I think is one of the great things that makes us better teachers.
Yeah, I mean, people see to me and are like, they're so shocked how much I'm organized and how much I'm out there. But at the same time, I've also taken advice from people like, you can have a set plan of what you want to do for the year. But at the same time, if you plan too far out, then when something goes wrong or something doesn't quite work out the way it is, you've now got to completely reschedule and backtrack. So my little thing is I try to plan out at least, the first couple of weeks and then say, let me see where they are by this point. And this way I can figure out, like, can I move forward? Like, I got to scale back. Like I said, we're on spring break. We got a week here, but I've got to say where I'm going to be gone half the day already because of a situation. But I'm like, this class was not here before spring break. Hopefully we'll have this all done by Monday and they can work it on this Wednesday. And then this will be the plan Friday since I'm a block schedule. But I'll say, yeah, but if they're not there by Friday, then I can just switch a couple things up or say, I need to backtrack on that too. I mean, I had a situation with one of my classes where it's like, we're going to do this Monday and it's going to take all day Monday. We should finish it. And well, it got towards the end of the day Monday. I said, we're not done, but that is not a horrible thing. It means we'll spend time on this and we'll get this all done before we leave. And we'll be able to start exactly where we were.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why even in my schedule on how I get stuff done during the day, my Fridays are free. So that way, if for any reason a prep was, taken away, we had a snow day, I had to go cover someone else's prep or something like that, something happened, I had to take care of a situation, it's not that big of a deal too. Having that flexibility and learning to have that balance. I feel like I wasn't great at when I first started teaching. I've definitely gotten better though.
Yeah, I have to say we're one thing about teachers, we're teaching people about learning is lifelong, and then we as ourselves kind of have to follow that model, as you said, and everything else, and not just say, oh yeah, I know everything and that's it. It's like, no, things change, times change. Maybe you have to do it. Like I said myself, I have a curriculum or I have an established curriculum. I said, doesn't mean I don't update it. One thing I always said about later on with COVID is like, it made me having a sample to say like, what's actually stuff they really need to do and what stuff's just fluff. What is actually just filling the time because I had to fill the time when I kind of realized, why do I need that? And maybe I can start focusing on that. And I realized that started making my lessons better. It also made me go back to some things I had done years ago where like, this is a disaster. It's never going to work. And then finally it's like, wait, you know what? We can go back to this. I think it has more prevalence now than it did
Mhm.
back then. And I can, use some more better strategies and so forth. And one time I brought back, like I said, about a simulation program I do for my business class. I was walking into one of our new social studies teachers, and he had come up with a Sims project on colonization. And I was talking with him. I said, I did this years ago and it was okay. It wasn't bad, but I never thought about doing this way. And he's like, well, why don't you just do it again? He's like, take my ideas. I mean, granted, it's a little different, but why don't you do that? And yeah, I brought it back. And the first class we did with it was rough. The second class, much better. And now 2 years, I should say 3 years later, I got running clock. I mean, the kids don't even get confused. First, it'd be like, okay, guys, this is going to be probably a little rough. Understand the process, and yeah, it is. And they're happy. I'm very honest with it. But then they just kind of get into it, and it's like, okay, then now I'm not as worried. I'm pretty much like, hey, it's going to start off rough with some of you, but by the time we're at this stage, you guys should be knowing what's going on, and we should be having fun, and it just takes off from that.
Yeah. And I love when you get to that point in teaching where you can start experimenting like that. Cause I feel like, your first couple of years, you're just trying to survive and keep your head above water and get everything done. But then you get into that rhythm of like, well, now I get to play and be creative and kind of almost treat it like an experiment. I mean, just because something doesn't go well doesn't mean that you're awful or anything. It's just having fun with teaching and letting your ideas go and creating and tweaking things.
Yeah, and I have to agree. Even when you go like say, oh yeah, I've been teaching 18 years, and you go to a new district. Well, you got a whole new set of students, you got a whole new set of policies, you got a whole different admin, and you're kind of like, well, let me just get in there and start getting things established. And then as they say, start pulling things back to having a little fun. I mean, my current district, which I will not be part of anymore in a couple months, is like those first 3 months were just trying to survive, trying to really get and even though I had curriculum, but it's like, this is a new set of students. This is a different set of areas. And I found things that they loved that previous students had hated and vice versa. And then by then it was like, oh, now I can have some fun. And then by the end of the year, I was like, oh yeah. So then when I started this year off, I was like, hey, we're off and running. We can do some new stuff. I can try some new experiments. And it was very successful as a result.
Absolutely.
Well, and more on that, Helena, what about your own? Because you're like me, you're a fellow podcast. So what is your set? Because we were talking about schedules, and like I said, I think you're finally the last teacher that's going to finally say, Ryan, get Candly and start getting your schedules correctly. But what do you try to do with your own podcast? I mean, you do a lot with the present teacher, and you do a lot with your materials and your seminars and Circle. But how do you move on to that right there yourself with your podcast and what you're trying to do with that message out there?
So for me, that looks like, because I'm still in the classroom, that looks a lot like I like to I like to turn YouTube videos and then to change them and transform them into podcast episodes. I started with my podcast and I absolutely loved it. I loved the community I created, but I wanted to reach more teachers. So I started changing it to that. And so for me, like we talked about earlier, a lot has to do with batching and taking those things that I learned from business and applying it to teaching. But on Mondays, it looks like me recording any episodes I need for the upcoming month. And then on Tuesdays, I'm editing and transforming them into other aspects. So, I mean, having a set schedule like that kind of eases the stress of trying to figure out what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And so that's kind of how I've just kind of morphed. I started with something until I felt like I had it, and then I started adding more to what I'm doing, and then I started repurposing anything from my podcast and YouTube channel to social media, and I've had an absolute blast doing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I started off with like, blogging back in like 2012, which was very more common little piece there. And then of course I had done podcasts, but more fan podcasting, which was very popular at the time. And I kind of started realizing, maybe you can do more of an education. You can actually start talking things. And I kind of started taking stuff I did on my blog and moved that to the podcast. Later, I did to the guest scenario, and now to live stream, which sometimes have also been live feeds. As I joke with other teachers who do podcasts like you and some other people out there, both on the networks and other ones, sometimes they always say, it's like, it's so funny. We'll do these live feeds and we'll have a great educator or whatever guest, and maybe we'll want 2 views. And it's like, then we'll record something, do this big little thing, and we're not live. We'll just pop up there. Also, like 40 people want to watch it. It's like, what's going on here? It's like, you don't have the time for me being live feed with everybody, but hey, if I record it and do the exact same thing, it's like all of a sudden I'm more popular. It's like, wait, I don't get how that works. But it is interesting about finding that niche that really kind of trans into that, as you said yourself, taking those remixes and things and then kind of moving it onto the podcasting as well too, to make that connection and communication, especially through social media.
Yeah, absolutely. How many podcasts have you had? I'm curious now.
This officially, as me as the main person, is my third. I've been involved. I was involved some early ones, believe it or not, around 2007, 2008, actually. Back in the days, as we said, when we had Skype and there was no live stream and everything, and in that too. But it's like each one was always a little different. One was a fan case. One was more about awareness. Like I said, epilepsy awareness. My wife has epilepsy and it's been involved in my life for a lot of time. So we talked about it, awareness. And then it's like here, it's kind of is. And I've kind of learned doing this, doing the videos, doing the podcast. It's where my passion really is. And I kind of, it was always way back then. And this is just kind of when I transition to it as well. So I've kind of focused on this, and this is something that everybody seems to approve. Everybody thinks I try to keep it very, very neutral from anything. And like, I mean, sometimes it's kind of funny when it's like, well, this guy's not a math teacher, but he's talking about things I can use in my math classrooms tomorrow. Or, hey, he's using a strategy I didn't think that worked, versus like, you know what? I'm kind of glad this guy likes to talk about Star Trek or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles once in a while, or he just goes off complete and talks about gardening and geocaching. It's like, this is so different, but yet so educational or so engaging. And sometimes I know sometimes I'm very surprised what, like, oh, this episode I had with so-and-so, wow, 12 downloads in the last month. Great. Versus like, I talked about my sunflower and my vegetable gardening and pickling, and it's got 90 downloads in less than 4 days. It's like, wait, what? And it's like my subscriptions don't change, but it's into like one of my most popular podcasts is from Kylo, who's the host of the You Can Beat Video Games. He plays classic video games from all the platforms, runs his own business and everything. And his episode is the most popular one I had. And then the second one is two kindergarten teachers with Christine Pinto and Jessica Talent, who are, and that aired 4 years ago. And it's still my second most popular episode. And I'm just like, why are those two like such big episodes? And then I have other ones where it's just like, they get popular, but it's very interesting. Sometimes you just don't know what's really going to just grab somebody's attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I had some people message me, some middle school and high school teachers. And when I started the present teacher, I was kind of aimed towards my elementary teachers. And they're like, I had no idea you were geared towards elementary. All this stuff, I thought you were talking to middle school teachers. And it's just crazy how, the same piece of content can just be, perceived in different ways. And you can get something from, different pieces of content and take what you need from it, which I think one of the great things about podcasting that I love about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like me. I've started using the thinking classroom model, and that's mostly was designed by a math teacher. And Peter's hopefully going to be in an episode here next season. I've talked to him, and he's like, "I'd love to do it," but I was like, my schedule's not good until fall. I said, "That's fine." But he was on our Facebook group, and he was just surprised, like, you're a business and tech and media teacher. You found a good way to use my book and my strategies in a classroom I never even thought of. And he's even admitted too. He's like, I've seen it in social studies classes. I've seen a completely, paperless classroom where they used Canva for the exact same things. The only thing he pointed out was like, what if you do this with the kids? Oh, I never thought of it. But he was like, I'm impressed. I'm like, this is completely digital, doing the exact same model. And it was a social studies classroom. It just blew him away. So he's like, whoa, you've completely taken my model that I've been working on for 20 years and turned into a paperless kind of setup in ways I never imagined. But did you think about this with collaboration? No, I didn't. So henceforth, he was impressed, but he said, here's some advice though, to maybe make it better, even though it's something I never thought I'd ever see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Helena, this has been a great, 40 minutes and everything else too. And I know for all our listeners want to probably jump on and subscribe to your podcast and of course like that. So how could they get in touch with you besides people in the live feed or seeing all the little scrolling downstairs, how they connect, but how can they connect to the present teacher and where else can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, thank you for having me. I had a blast. I loved this conversation. And if you want to learn more from me, you can go to @thepresentteacher. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm Helena Hains. I have my own podcast called The Present Teacher Podcast and my own YouTube channel called The Present Teacher as well.
And hopefully everybody's going to subscribe and do that too. I mean, I finally got on. I mean, I've been subscribing to a couple of things. I finally subscribed to your LinkedIn. So there we go. We're professional now. I finally subscribed to your LinkedIn network and I've been following your stuff there lately. So, but no, thank you so much for joining us today, especially on this. Hopefully it's nice. I mean, it's a sunny day where I am in Illinois, but it's kind of cold and windy there. And I mean, all the way from New Mexico. And that's one thing I also like, but doing podcasts like this, so we can just, connect, worldwide all the time on everything. And also thank you for everything you do. I mean, I'm definitely working on some of your stuff. And, I have to say, like I said, I wish you would have been around when I was doing my first earlier stuff as well, which it's hard to believe it was almost 15 years ago now. So I'm like, so you're doing amazing stuff there. And as somebody who has now old enough to have his own students become teachers, I know they definitely look at your work too, to help them with those first years stuff that I wish I could have given them advice for back then.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That means so much. And again, thank you for connecting with me and thank you for allowing me to be a part of your community. It's been a blast.
It has, and thank you so much for that. And as for everybody else too, definitely, like I said, check out the show notes, especially on the audio here, how I connect to Helena. And everybody else, thank you for joining us today on the Pixel Classroom podcast, and we will see everybody later.